Perseverance, right decisions, and the correct management can take you from zero to almost $37.2 billion in net worth. Hello and welcome back to another video. And yes, we are talking about none other than Ernst and Young. Ernst and Young, one of the world's leading professional service organizations, helped companies across the globe to identify and capitalize on business opportunities. They deliver the value that clients care about. They provide ideas and solutions tailored to meet clients' needs and also produce tangible assets. Ernst & Young's depth and breadth of service and the global reach meant that they have the resources to serve any client anywhere in the world. Welcome to Schematic World. This is Shantanu Mukherjee helping you how to grow yourself today. If you want to learn more on how to develop success abilities, then do consider subscribing to the channel to never miss a video such as this. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. The history of Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young is the fourth largest public accounting firm in the world. The firm was formed in 1989 when the third largest accounting firm at that time, Ernst & Viney, based in Cleveland, Ohio, merged with the sixth largest firm, Ernst Young, headquartered in New York, forming what at that time was the world's largest accounting firm. As of 1999, Ernst & Young stood as one of the big five accounting firms that dominated the accounting business. A private partnership, Ernst & Young was owned by its senior partners. Ernst & Young provided auditing services primarily to the world's largest corporations. In addition, it specialized in tax advice for multinational firms. In recent years, the firm increasingly moved into the business of management consulting, providing guidance to its clients in such areas as risk management, mergers and acquisitions, and recent trends in worker management relations. Other services included consulting on information technology and legal services. Company origins. The roots of Ernst & Young can be traced back well over 100 years to the formation of the auditing business and the development of generally accepted accounting principles, rules that became increasingly necessary with the rise of the multinational corporation and their intrusion of complicated taxes into private businesses. Prior to the 1989 merger, each of the two firms had enjoyed rich histories. Both rose from very low beginnings by capitalizing on the enterprise potential of accounting in its early years. Pioneer Ernst Young founded and headed the original Ernst Young firm back in 1895 in Kansas City after breaking from an earlier union of the firm of Stewart and Young in Chicago. In 1896, Young formed the firm of Ernst Young and Company with his brother Stanley, but by 1906, Young had completely terminated his unsatisfactory partnership with Stewart. Ernst Young and Company flourished for many years, slowly developing its reputation as old, reliable for auditing, adding more and more partners throughout the years. The other half of the marriage, Ernst and Viney, can be traced back to 1906 when Ernst & Ernst was founded in Cleveland, Ohio as a partnership between Alvin C. Ernst and his elder brother Theodore C. Ernst. The firm took on its first additional partners in 1910, and from there the family tree expanded by immense and unforeseen proportions. By 1913, when income taxes began to be levied in the United States, the need for accountants swelled dramatically. By the 1980s, the firm had become one of the largest members of the Big Eight. In one of its more publicized actions, Ernst & Viney's audit paved the way of 1979 government bailout and of the Chrysler Corporation. Meanwhile, the Ernst Young firm endured a rocky decade in the 1980s. Long known for its reliable auditing practices and a clean conservative interpretation of tax law, the company image was tarnished by the events of 1980s, many in the areas of national savings and loan scandals. For instance, Ernst Young was sued for $560 million for allegedly allowing Western Savings Association of Dallas to overstate its net worth by more than $400 million. In 1988, the Bank of England sued Ernst Young and collected $44 million after a bank that Young audited collapsed. In contrast to the struggles of Ernst Young, prior to the merger, Ernst Young's business had thrived, with its management consulting practices growing faster than its audit and taxes practice. In fact, at the time of the merger, consulting fees accounted for 24% of Ernst Young's revenues, whereas only 17% of Ernst Young's revenues came from consulting. The 1989 merger. In general, both firms thought that a merger presented a comparative advantage for each. Although both had heavy hitters for clients, Ernst Young's clients were mostly investment banks and high-tech firms on the east and west coast, while Ernst Young had more healthcare and manufacturing industry clients concentrated in the Midwest and South. Internationally, Ernst Young had more clients in Europe, while Ernst Young had established a presence in the Pacific Rim countries. Ernst Young's clients included American Express, Mobile and Texas Instruments, while Ernst Young had Bank of America, Time, Incorporations and Eli Lilly. Although touted as a merger, the evidence suggests that the 1989 transaction that created the firm Ernst Young was in fact an acquisition in disguise, with the stronger Ernst Young swallowing up the foundering Ernst Young practice. Ernst Young had established a strong reputation over many years, although it was generally seen as a cautious and stodgy practice. By the 1980s, after much of its traditional audit practices started to collapse and massive leave guard buyouts became an increasingly common practice in the business world, Ernst Young had difficulty competing in the cutthroat environment of the accounting arena. Historically, the accounting business has seen increasing numbers of partners concentrated in a decreasing number of firms. In this respect, the birth of Ernst Young in 1989 was the natural outcome of the cycle of completion that breeds concentration and expansion, thus leading to further rounds of competition. But for over half a century previous to the creation of Ernst Young, 8 firms had dominated the accounting business. The elite group was dubbed the Big 8 by the Fortune magazine. Following 2 major mergers in 1980s, and the Big 8 became the Big 6. All of the Big 6 were private partnerships, meaning that all were owned by the firm's senior executives, which also meant that none of the firms were required to report their profits. The Ernst Young merger created a firm with 6,100 partners and 2 executive officers, Ray Grooves and Ernst Young, and William Gladstone from Ernst Young. The newly formed firm had world revenues in the 1989 of $4.27 billion, and its total sales eclipsed that established by a merger in 1987 of Pete Maverick and KMG Main Herdman. The actual merger in 1989 was essentially viewed as a smart competitive move, although some observers thought that the merger might be difficult due to perceived differences in management styles, with Ernst Young governed from the top and Ernst Young favoring a more decentralized management system. At the time of the merger, Ernst Young had 1,276 partners and 14,739 total personnel in 118 US offices, as well as 3,159 partners and 35,600 total personnel in 89 countries. The smaller Ernst Young, on other hand, had 829 US-based partners and 10,652 US total personnel in 93 offices. Worldwide, they had 2,900 partners and 33,000 total personnel in 74 countries. There was a conflict at the time of the merger over each firm's cola clients. A conflict of interest existed in that PepsiCo had been an Ernst Young client since 1965, while Coca-Cola had been an Ernst Young client since 1924. Coca-Cola forced the firm to dump PepsiCo, as Ernst Young noted that Coca-Cola had been a client for a longer time and that Coke's annual audit fees was $14 million, a much higher figure than Pepsi's $8.8 million audit fees. In one of its business decisions following the merger, Ernst Young began to move into a computer-aided software engineering. This step reflected Ernst Young's diversification into management systems and strategic planning services for business. Under the general heading of development effectiveness, these services capped a string of moves into computer-aided software engineering. The general thrust of the project comparated management consulting, total quality management, and process innovation. The process innovation services were sold worldwide, primarily to the insurance and banking industries. The expansion in the 1990s. Despite these troubles, Ernst Young defied the rumors that it would fold. To eliminate overlap created by the merger and to reduce its payroll expenses, the firm cut its staff in 1991 and eliminated many partner positions. Although revenues had fallen slightly in the late 1980s, by the early 1990s, revenues were modestly but steadily rising. Sales from the Ernst Young's risk management and actuarial services group rose from 7.4% from 1990 to 1991 from $9.5 million to $10.5 million. Overall revenues rose from $5 billion in 1990 to $5.4 billion in 1991 and $5.7 billion in 1992. The company garnered an increasing number of clients, and their involvement in such large projects as municipal insurance and environmental risk management consulting continued to grow. Revenues in risk management consulting went from $10.3 million in 1991 to $10.9 million in 1992. This increase resulted in the market of these kind of services. Moreover, major restructuring was taking place in hospitals and in the healthcare industry in general, creating a need for consultants. The traditional Ernst Young mainstay auditing still fared quite well in the firm's early years. By 1992, in fact, Ernst Young performed the most audits of largely public held multinational companies. It audited 3,231 companies with a total value audited of $10.228 trillion. Ernst Young's costly legal battles encouraged several charges in the mid-1990s. First, the firm hired a new general legal counsel, Catherine Oberle, who reputedly made keeping costs down at higher priority than battling on principle. Second, the firm stepped up its expansion into consulting, an area much far less fraught with legal responsibilities and their commitment lawsuits than auditing. In addition to increasing its consulting in risk management, the company moved into information software products. Ernst Young also entered new business areas in the mid-1990s by developing alliances and by acquiring smaller companies. In 1996, the firm forged an alliance with Tata Consulting headquartered in India. The same year, its alliance with ISD Shaw gave the firm an entry into banking industry consulting. The firm moved into the petroleum and petrochemical consulting business in 1996 when it purchased Wright Killen and Company. Ernst Young created a new subsidiary with the Houston-based company, which they named Ernst Young Wright Killen. To summarize, in this story, we get to understand that Ernst Young is one of those organizations who took a heavy hand into understanding that partnering with other companies and other organizations could give them a very good boost in the market and economy. Using this as an advantage, Ernst Young used its partnership techniques, the management techniques, and the perseverance in the market to grow and grow to $37.2 billion in today's net worth. Well, that is all for the day, and I hope you learned something new. If you did, then let me know down in the comments below what do you think of the success of Ernst Young. Also, check out my other videos linked here on the end screen, and with that, I shall take my leave and I shall see you in the very next one. Thank you.